All right. Well, we are officially kicking off UnPack Pittsburgh. I'm very excited. For those of you who may not know, UnPack Pittsburgh is a new company where we're going to highlight people, places, and products in the Pittsburgh area. So we're very excited. So if you're a person out there, you know a place, or you have a product, go to unpackpittsburgh.com, click on the Get Featured tab, and drop us a note, and we're happy to kind of unpack whatever you got going on. So today, if you believe in serendipity, this episode is for you. I could not be more happy and excited to be with Tom Olenic and Ray Hartjen.
Yeah,
say it right?
There
All right, see. They are authors of the new book, Immaculate, How the Steelers Saved Pittsburgh. Before we get into that, I do want them to kind of introduce themselves, but to kind of circle back why it's a little serendipitous is Tom is my uncle. Kind of like a second father. In fact, I'm actually on page 345 as Neff's son, so I'm happy to sign books after this. So go ahead and talk a little bit about yourself so they can understand, in fact, that you guys are not actual authors.
Yes. Well, thank you, Brian, and thanks for hosting us. Yes, as Brian said, I'm not especially an author or writer. I'm actually a biotech executive, although I am from Pleasant Hills. I was born in Mon Valley and grew up in Pleasant Hills, and have had a wonderful upbringing in Pittsburgh. It's been very unique from my perspective, growing up here in the 70s and 80s, and where times in the macro side were challenging with the Vietnam War and Watergate and all these wonderful things that happened. But more importantly, the steel industry was declining significantly. My father was laid off, as many in town were. But thankfully, we had the Steelers. The Steelers went from being the worst franchise in football to the best in the dynasty, and it forever helped us get through those times, having a team like Pittsburgh and the Steelers and the characters in which they were to help us. It was just a positive time. And so that was the emphasis of the book. Obviously, I met Ray, and I go back several years, so introduce Ray. You can.
Yeah, so right now you are not in Pleasant Hills. You've since moved
right.
out of Pleasant Hills, Pittsburgh. You moved many places, Atlanta, Buffalo, but you've ended up, and you currently live in
the Bay Area of California, where Ray does as well. He and I are friends for many years, as many adults do. We met through our kids, right? We both have kids about the same age, although they go to rival schools, but nonetheless, Ray and I have spent a good amount of time, and when I proposed the book to him, he was all in, thankfully, and he's a talented writer, so thank goodness from my perspective, he was able to join and help me on this book.
All right, now the man of the hour, Ray.
Wanted to, first of all, Brian, thank you so much for having us. Real pleasure and honor. Thank you. My name is Ray Hartjen. I'm a writer and a musician in the Bay Area, California. My writing is not writing of books, at least not until this book. It's a lot of content marketing writing and then sports reporting, very specifically around auto racing and the San Jose Sharks hockey team. Like Tom said, we'd been friends, met through our children about 15 years ago. I'm going to take a guess. Mm-hmm. And as Tom started sharing his passion project, a thesis that he had kind of bouncing around in his head for decades. He had shared it with his wife so many times, shared it with me so many times. We just, sat down one day and said, like, hey, if not now, when? Let's get started on this. And once we started writing, we never really stopped. And later, at the end of it, about an 18-month writing process, we came about with a book that I'm pretty proud of. I'm happy the way that turned out.
Yeah, and first of all, hold that book up one more time because the cover is absolutely fantastic. And there's a lot of you. If you're listening to this on the podcast, you can go to their website, which is SteelersSavedPittsburgh.com. You can also buy the book there. But if you're watching on YouTube or social media, the picture of Franco, as most Pittsburgh or anyone who's ever traveled through the Pittsburgh International Airport, the Franco statue, it's pretty iconic, and that cover is just sweet. So. It's a great. I have them all over my office. And actually, for those of you, this is literally the first time we've ever practiced on the equipment, but Tom and Ray were in town for some of the stuff that they might talk about on this, and I didn't want to miss the opportunity. So we don't have a studio. We're not on site. Thank you to Stonewater Salon Spa for letting me use the my office, 3 guys and 1 couch. If you're in Pittsburgh and you're looking for a haircut, a massage, a facial, a spray tan, lash extensions, check out stonewatersalonspa.com. They're fantastic. It's an experience like none other. Okay, so let's get into, before we get to the book, let's kind of talk about the process leading up to the book. So this is your passion project. You're obviously a diehard Pittsburgh Steeler, right?
I'm beginning to become a respectful Steeler fan.
Well, just real quick, because Tom and Ray actually just did a talk at the Pleasant Hills Library, and I attended, so I had a little background knowledge coming into this. So I can't just skip over the fact that when this started and your first favorite NFL team was not the Steelers. So why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I learned a lot writing this book. And when you talk about you're not from Pittsburgh and all this, I kind of wish I was from Pittsburgh. And as I look to eventually move from California, I would absolutely consider moving to Pittsburgh from all that I've learned about the city. But I was born in Texas. I'm 59 years old, or 59 next week, born in 1964. So when I got started following football, as a good Texan, I was a Dallas Cowboy fan. And I was a Dallas Cowboy fan.
Nobody's perfect.
Beginning just before they, facing the Steelers in 2 Super Bowls. So for me, there's no way that the 10-year-old Ray, you could ever convince him that the 58-year-old Ray would be holding up a book that he co-authored that was about the Pittsburgh Steelers in Pittsburgh. So I was a dutiful Cowboys fan in my youth. The Oilers were my second favorite team. That's a team that could never win the AFC Central over the Steelers, and in fact lost 2 playoff games at Three Rivers Stadium. And then, to make matters worse, my third favorite team was my mama's favorite team. My mom was like everybody else's mom in the day. She liked Kenny Stabler, quarterback of the Oakland Raiders.
Triple boo.
And so the Raiders were my third favorite team, and of course the Raiders fell on the short end of 3 different playoff games to the Steelers. So it was interesting for me to have to relive that. We watched a lot of game film, a lot of televised recordings on YouTube of these Steelers victories, and a lot of times they brought back some painful memories for me as a little kid going, oh man, I'm repeating the miserable Sunday that I had to live when I was 12 years old, 13 years old, and so on.
Cool. So let's get to the process of writing the book. Tom, this is your passion project. You guys both live in Pleasanton, California. It's been like a brainchild in your head for years. How did that process work from, let's get it from here to that beautiful book?
As Ray said, it's been going around my head for decades, right? Because of the influence that I saw when I grew up here in the 70s and 80s, and when I left, right? I had left in the early 80s and then traveled, as Bryan had said, to many different states. And as I did, the thesis of how the Steelers influenced Pittsburgh in such a positive way continued to grow. It just did. And I looked at I've been in Buffalo, and my son went to Michigan, so I spent a lot of time in Detroit. So similar cities that haven't made the pivot that Pittsburgh has. And the thesis behind it, I know of growing up, is how important the Steelers were in those Super Bowl victories, and the players. We had heroes, right? We had the opportunity to have heroes, and I hate to say, Buffalo, Detroit, and Cleveland, similar cities, Rust Belt cities, they've never won a Super Bowl, and they haven't made the pivot into what Pittsburgh is today, one of the most livable cities, and one of the most and pivoted to from an industrial hub to a tech hub, right? For both looking at Pitt and CMU and all the wonderful things that's coming out. So as I continue to look at it and grow, I continue to think about a book, and did some research. Some writing, very little, just kind of trying to figure out what should be going in the book. And as we look, with the final kind of straw that I said, okay, I got to do it. I was in Tampa, and my wife is from Toledo, and she everywhere we go, we always run into a Pittsburgh, right? And it's fun, and we have an immediate connection. So much so that my wife calls Pittsburghers a cult. So interesting enough, usually cult is has a religious people, but when I looked up the definition, it is a what was it again, Ray? It was
excessive admiration for a particular thing.
Yeah, excessive admiration for a particular thing, which I have to say, perhaps she's right. Maybe it is a cult, because many of us do love the city, and continue.
Amen.
So So that's So I was actually at a wedding, and of course I get introduced to someone that's wife's from Pittsburgh, and we get introduced, and I was getting introduced that I live in California, and the first thing out of her mouth was, "Are you still a Pittsburgh Steelers fan?" Of course, that's where things start, and that's the connection that does keep us together, and it's so important to us. The terrible towels that you see on the away games and all that, it really does, show the pride of Pittsburgh as well, tied with the Steelers. So with that, I said I'm going to do it, and I've been talking about it, and I continue to talk about Ray and I've talked to Ray about this before, and as he said, we just said, okay, if not now, when? And it's like, let's just do it, right? And the process itself was like, okay, let's start writing this. And of course, we were slow initially, and then we don't remember who did what, but we remember like doing some math. Like, okay, it's 2022. The Immaculate Reception was, 72. Oh my goodness. The 50-year anniversary of the Immaculate Reception, the greatest play in NFL history, is going to be coming up. And this was probably, Ray, about 6 months, from the Immaculate Reception. Was that 6 to 8 months that we
we started. I think it was more probably around maybe March or April 2022, and we're like, hey, we need to get this book out. As two first-time authors, we had no idea how the publishing industry works. So it's like, how do we start shopping this around? So we figured it out, book proposals, things like that, and that was around May. So we're 7 months away from the 50th anniversary, and we talked to 3 publishers. Thankfully, all 3 were very excited about the book, and then all 3 also broke us the news that it takes about 18 months to get a book published. And we're like, well, that doesn't work for us. We need it done in 7 months. And by the way, the manuscript's not finished, right?
Exactly.
And so it was a case where they told us, it's possible, it's not probable, but kudos to our publisher, Morgan James. They saw the value in dropping in the book. It was such a late addition to their catalog that it wasn't able to be pre-sold by the sales team into booksellers, but it was very important to us, at least from an online perspective, to be able to have this book available at the peak of people's interest in the Immaculate Reception. That would be the 50th anniversary. So we learned a lot there, and it really put the burr under our saddle, so to speak, to get the book done. We had a hard stop at the end of July, and so June and July were, let's get the conclusion to this book.
Yeah, that's cool. And I went to the game with you, so that was a good game. And
the 50th anniversary game. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Which was like, I don't know, the coldest game in Steeler history or something.
Yeah, it was cold. Yeah. It was cold. They thought it was going to be colder, but we did it. We're tough. We're from Pittsburgh.
Exactly.
So, cool. So, like I said a couple times, you guys just spoke at the Pleasant Hills Library, and Ray, you said something that literally was, I couldn't use words better, hence you're an author, is the book is like a collection of campfire stories. And it's so true. Have read the book. There are so many little factoids and stories, like who was the first draft pick from the Pittsburgh Steelers, and that was
Mr. William Shakespeare.
Exactly. That's right.
None other.
Probably not the William Shakespeare you're thinking about.
But just little things like that that just make any Steeler fan, any local Pittsburgh fan, any sports fan just get very excited. So I do have to ask, what story, I know there's a collection of stories, but if you guys want to talk about just one that meant something to you, either one of you, both of you, just tell me a story that really caught you.
First of all, I want to, the reason it became a collection of campfire stories is that Tom and I were really confused on how to tell these stories. Yeah. Tom's thesis that he has been bantering around in his head for 20 years is that, Pittsburgh was born and built on iron and steel. And then all of a sudden, rather abruptly, the steel industry went away. 1975, 1985, pretty painful time here in Pittsburgh, economically, right? But past that, Pittsburgh emerged as a titan and almost a model city in the new economy. Pittsburgh's renown around the world, I didn't know it now, I didn't know it then, but I know it now, around the world is recognized as a leader in academia, healthcare, medical research, technology, robotics. It made this deindustrialization and transformation, this pivot from industrialized economy to a new economy city. What's the difference? How come Detroit has struggled so difficult in that transformation? Why has Cleveland? Why has Akron? Why has Youngstown, Gary, Indiana, Buffalo, and the like? And as Tom had said earlier, his belief is that it's the city's identity with its football team. This team that was kind of built in a mirror image of hardworking, blue collar, take a shower after work, not before work type of mentality. And when the city needed its heroes, it looked at its football team. So how can we tell the story of how the Steelers saved Pittsburgh without telling the story of Pittsburgh? And you can't tell the story of Pittsburgh without telling the story of Pennsylvania. And then as Tom and I started thinking about these three different themes, these stories, it's like all these people that are included in each one of those types of themes. It's sort of like, the whole idea of UnPack Pittsburgh, right? The people and the products and the places, right? And so when we saw these people, these unbelievable characters, whether they were business people in the steel industry, civic leaders, the athletes themselves, and then these interesting factoids that just became up. And so I think we did a pretty good job of weaving these separate themes together, building it around the Steelers and the Immaculate reception play, kind of this inflection point. And like you said, Bryan, I view it as a collection of campfire types of stories. And one story that is me not being a Pittsburgh native found fascinating, discovered the whole bunch of them, like why Pittsburgh has an H on the end of it and everyone else doesn't. But there's not a city in the world that has more bridges in it than the city of Pittsburgh. It is the city, not only the city of champions, it's the city of bridges. That includes Venice, Italy, which is pretty much nothing but bridges. I think there's 460 some odd bridges in the city of Pittsburgh. Had no idea before, but that's maybe 2 paragraphs in the book, but I think it's an example of what you talked about, these interesting factoids that.
And the bridges, there's always something under construction. So. Yeah, that's a good one.
The only constant is under construction.
Yeah. How about yourself?
Yeah. Well, as Ray said too, it was an interesting process because it's important to me to talk about the history, right? As Ray said, there's no way to say how the Steelers saved Pittsburgh without knowing the history of Pittsburgh and where it was. And the interesting part too is just having traveled a great deal and lived in many different places. There's a really uniqueness to the relationship with the Steelers, the city of Pittsburgh, the people, and the steel industry. Look, the Steelers are named after an industry. That's pretty rare, right? And how important it was, and then it went away, right? It declined drastically, and Pittsburghers, picked themselves up, dusted themselves off, and moved on. And it was just, as we did this work, back to what Ray said too, is the stories. They were just so many. We couldn't even include all of them. There were just so many really interesting stories, and one of my favorite, obviously, is the Immaculate Reception Ball. It was, most people think, it's the biggest play in NFL history by ESPN, and yet it's not in the Hall of Fame. What? You gotta be kidding me. I remember doing the research. I'm like, well, where's the ball, right? And back then, they didn't have 15 balls, right? They had 1 or 2. That's it, right? And obviously, the story goes is, Jim Baker, who was here from in South Hills, he's had the ball for 50 years in West Mifflin in his insurance company in his safe. And there's a wonderful story of how he was there with his nephew after they rushed the field after Franco's touchdown. They were pushed back. He continued to watch the ball. It went through the uprights, Dorella's extra point. It careened off a cement siding, and there was a bit mad scramble. He came out with it, put it in his nephew's jacket, and they ran out of the stadium with it. I mean, can you imagine that? It's just unbelievable. This is the Immaculate Reception Ball, right? And for him to have the foresight of going after that was pretty amazing, right? And I had the opportunity to meet with Jim, and Jim's a wonderful person, and the ball means so much to him because of his son was born a few days prior to that, and then eventually passed away from cancer at 33. So that ball was part of the family. And when Jim told the story, he was so emotional about it and how important it was to him. And he was very tight with Franco. He and Franco had a very good relationship with the ball. So just recently, he has given it to or sold it to another. I don't know the story behind that at this point. I'm sure I'll have a chance to meet with Jim and he can tell me all about that. But it's just still amazing to me that ball is not in the Hall of Fame, right? And it's part of the mystique a little bit of the Steelers. And Jim was gracious enough to allow me to touch it. And I'll be honest, I was so for the next 3 days, you know what I mean? It's like I was like a teenager being kissed by some star or something. You know what I mean? And I was just in awe. And it was just, I remember of sharing the picture of me francoing is like the front of the book is, and it really was an emotional kind of connection with all of this as well. So again, I appreciate Jim you giving me the opportunity to do that, and really the story of is a really unique story. I don't know of another ball story like that in sports. So yeah.
You can't share too much about the story because then nobody will buy the book, right? So we have a lot of stories to it.
Exactly.
I think Bryan, these collection of stories, building it together, trying to figure out, how to write this book. When Tom was, building around his head, I think, the genesis for us to finally get started is that not only does his wife, Chris Ann, get tired of hearing him talking about, this is going to make a great book. He had only talked to me about it 5 or 6 times, but I was already getting tired of hearing about it. We got to do this book. And so, a thing has happened in my life. On March 11th, 2019, I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma. And it's an incurable, treatable blood cancer. But like a lot of people, I think that are similar to me, I took things for granted a lot. Relationships for granted, and certainly time for granted. And being diagnosed with cancer kind of pushed me to not take things for granted. And that's when I came. When Tom was talking to me, I share with him. One of my mottos as I fight cancer is like, if not now, when? Right? We all have uncertain futures in front of us. But let's get started. Let's get started with the book, Tom. And if we should veer off of what your vision is, we can stop. And that kind of the really cool thing is that we never stopped until we got to the final period. We didn't seem to stray too far from his vision. And I considered writing this book, helping Tom write this book, as my gift to Tom. Tom's a scientist. He's a biologist, I think, by training. Is that it, right? And I, however, I write for a living, and I'm like, I can help you with this. And Tom's a good friend of mine. That's what friends do, right? I'm going to give Tom the gift of my ability to help him write this book. And what was super interesting, I think very impactful to me, is a couple of very early in writing the book, a month or two, he's like, hey Ray, I understand you're giving me the gift of your time and writing this book, and that's great. What would you think about donating the proceeds of this book to cancer charities? And very specifically, the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, Hillman Cancer Center. And I was like, I was kind of blown away. I think maybe for once in my life I was just a little bit speechless, maybe, but whatever. And I was like,
it hasn't happened since.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it hasn't happened since. But that was I'm like, well, yeah, that's a really good idea. I mean, I don't know how much money this book will make or whatever, but this book isn't Tom's book. This book is Tom's love letter to the city of Pittsburgh. This is a proud Yinzer, proud of his community, and the book in itself is his gift to the community. What other better gift to the community be is like, hey, let's support like a great cause in the Hillman Cancer Center for UPMC and donate whatever proceeds we might be able to make from it. And so I think a lot of recognition for that goes to you, Tom, for willing to do that and get behind some a really good cause for a lot of really good people. So book about Pittsburgh by somebody from Pittsburgh for the people of Pittsburgh. I think it's kind of an important story to tell.
Yeah, really cool. That's fantastic. And what I heard from the Jim Baker story, his nephews are awesome. But no, the book's fantastic. To wrap up, and I kind of mentioned as we were kind of setting this up, a lot of people have been told, you should write a book. You should write a book. And there's a lot of people out there who have wanted to or have considered writing a book. And I just, knowing both of you, knowing that your background isn't an author, what advice would you have to someone out there who's considering writing a book?
Yeah. I'll be first. I think so many people now that we have the book have come up to me, and I'm sure Ray as well, like, I have these ideas, right, of books and that sort of thing. And my advice is just do it. Just start. right? Just get the process going. And for me, I wouldn't have been able to do this without Ray, right? So, if you have a good friend and who has as talented as Ray, I would say convince them to help. It's kind of a project together, right? And we really enjoyed doing it. Yeah, some days were long and harder and frustrating at times, maybe, but we really had fun and being able to do it with a good friend and a talented friend to really help navigate this was a great experience. And as parents, we always say to the kids, challenge yourself, do something, challenge yourself. Boy, this is challenging. From a biology guy, this is challenging. I make wine. That's easy. That's a chemistry project, right? But and to be able to do it and to have a purpose. It was my passion project, and then to be able to give back helps motivation.
Yeah, I think one advice, a couple things I give to people who are aspire to be writers or to write a book is that you cannot write a book if you don't write a book.
Yeah.
Right. And so I learned a saying from Sue Shapiro. She's an author from New York. She wrote a book, a lot of books, but one book in particular is the Book Bible, and it talks about how to become an author and get through the publishing proposals and things like that. And she was once having a conversation with a writer that's in her family, and she's talking about writer's block, and the guy pulled her aside and said, "Enough with the pretentious writer's block. Plumbers don't get plumber's block. They just plumb." Right? And so the point of this passage in her book was you don't have to write, you don't have to sit down and write War and Peace in one night. In fact, it would be horrible if you tried to do something like that. You don't even need to write thousands of words at a time. If you sit down and just pump out 250 to 400 words a day, in less than a year, you're going to have a book. And I didn't really sort of believe that at first. Like, that doesn't seem like right. If you're a writer, if you have any amount of writing ability, writing 250 words, we're looking at a couple paragraphs, right? That is not a heavy lift. This is something you should be able to do fairly easy. But when you look at the size of books these days, our book is a very thick book. It's about the final edition's maybe a little over 130,000 words, I believe. Average nonfiction books about 80,000 words. You do 400 words a day for 3/4 of a year. You've got your entire manuscript. So punch it out a little bit at a time. And watch the stories build on itself. And then I think Stephen King once said, you write with the door closed and you edit with the door open. So begin to share your work. Cool. Eventually, you're going to have to share your work with somebody. Yeah. So share your work, get feedback, respond to that feedback. You don't have to react to it in a way. You don't have to accept it all, but understand how potential readers are viewing your work, and incorporate those types of editing content. Don't wait until the very end. Have your heart set on these are my 80,000 words. Give it to somebody and say, yeah, we want to do this, change that. So like some of our campfire stories ended up on the cutting room floor. Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, there's a bit on Roberto Clemente, and I think that hurt you, right? It's like, oh.
He was a hero. Come
yeah.
on. That was
Roberto Clemente's, but our editor's like, yeah, but it's the Steelers, and I think there was a section on Iron City beer, which I thought was pretty interesting. Yeah. And that was on the cutting room floor. Yeah. But what's kind of cool about that, one last writer's tip, writers have to promote their own books. Yeah. Publishers are, they publish too many books to promote. And if you're Michelle Obama and you're writing a memoir, they can put some promotional muscle behind that. If you're a couple of first-time authors writing Immaculate, How the Steelers Saved Pittsburgh, it's up to you to market the book. So as you have blogs and videos and things like that, cutting room floor stuff is actually great content for us. Yeah. We can sit back and say, let's write a blog post about Iron City beer, something that never made the book, but a reader of ours might be interested in. So.
Yeah, that's excellent. I appreciate your guys' time. We're filming this in March. We'll probably post it in April. You guys have a talk actually tomorrow. That's correct. That's a pretty book. Why don't you just say a little bit about that? It will have already happened by this?
Yeah, exactly. We were invited to the Pittsburgh Humanities Festival, which is put on by CMU and the Culture Trust, which is really exciting. All right, there's an eclectic group of speakers and what they call conversations, which we're very excited to be part of. And we'll be there tomorrow to just talk about the book, just like this. And having the Q&As, we had the same thing at the Pleasant Hills Library, which I grew up across the street from, and it was really a lot of fun because a lot of people give a different perspective, and their perspective on things, and it's very exciting. So we're looking forward to being part, and we thank both CMU and the Culture Trust for inviting us.
And thank you to Belt Magazine for sponsoring our core conversation.
Yep.
You say it's a collection of, kind of eclectic collection of speakers that are being profiled in these 10 core conversations. But, what could be more eclectic than a couple knuckleheads from California coming in, right?
Exactly.
So,
talking about Pittsburgh. Yeah,
it's been surreal seeing behind the scenes. Like, even I was coming back from the Carrie Underwood concert, walking to the hotel in the Strip District, and I just happened to be walking past a bookstore, and I did a double take, and literally the bookstore was closed, but in the window was Tom and Ray's book, Immaculate, just there. It looked like a light was shining, and I'm like, is this real? Like, you guys really did it.
Imagine you find it unbelievable.
Yeah.
Imagine us walking around going, wow.
We have to pinch ourselves sometimes.
Yeah.
We do.
It's
We're
like,
like, oh my goodness.
Who are these guys using our names? Right?
Yeah.
That's really cool. It's been fun to kind of watch. I appreciate you guys making time. For those watching on YouTube, we may have, he'll be back in May. Are you?
I am hoping to be here in, I think it's July.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is where I'd like to be back.
Okay.
I'll be
Cool.
back in May and July, but yes.
Cool. So hopefully we can maybe do a part 2 of this. Maybe there'll be some other things that you guys are doing in the community we could announce on our pages. But I really appreciate your time. Congratulations on the success. If you're watching or listening, go to Steelers Saved Pittsburgh.com. Pick up a book. Pick up several books. You heard why. It's a great cause. It's a great book. And thank you for listening. UnPack Pittsburgh.
And Bryan, thank you again for the opportunity. We really appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank you very much.
And looking forward to seeing Unpacked Pittsburgh.
Yeah. And did you make it to Permane Brothers yet, by the way?
I did.
Once again, Ray's
I
not from
definitely
Pittsburgh.
made it
Last
to
night was the
Toronto,
first
Mandy's,
night.
yeah.
What was your
You did.
experience like? We got to end on a
It was
real local note.
great. Tom was so tired, and in fact, he even suggested maybe eating some other places. Like, well, you don't want to go to Permante's. He's like, we're gonna get you here, Permante's. But I did go to Permante's. I was a little bit, should I get the Pittsburgh or not? You had shared with me a night before.
Yeah.
He's like, well, get the Pittsburgh. It's the number 2 bestseller, and I was like, what's number 1? And Bryan, you were waiting for beer's the number 1, And so sure
Very
enough,
true.
when I walk in, they're Pittsburghers up at the top, number 2 bestseller. I'm like, oh, okay. I went with capicola and cheese. And on the waiter's suggestions, one of his favorite, he likes the pastrami.
That's what I always get.
It was pretty
That's
good.
what I always get. Pastrami.
I'm wondering if I can squeeze in a Permante's lunch or something like that.
Well, we have to get the fries.
Oh yeah, they had
that was-
little fries on the side. Of course, the fries in the sandwich they're famous for,
Yeah.
but something called Sam's Saint Smallwood fries or something.
They look fantastic.
Chili, cheese, bacon, and sour cream.
do you
Guys
know?
right next to us got it, and like, ain't nothing wrong with any of those ingredients right there. Right?
Yeah, there's that area down there. You guys were at the Strip District one that you're referring to. That area with the terminal, they're doing such a great job. Pittsburgh's really so many different
amazing.
areas, just
Yeah.
really
I think
being a
I
food
told
town.
Tom today, I think great place to people watch.
Yeah.
And all those stores, bakeries, fish markets, cafes.
Great food.
And springtime's coming in summer, so it's even more enjoyable. It's a little hard when it's 20 degrees outside, but it's still a good spot. So appreciate your time.
Thank you,
We'll
Bryan.
Thanks, Bryan.
reconnect, and thanks for everyone watching and listening. Take care. UnPackPittsburgh.com. All right, there you have it. Tom Olenic Ray Hartjen, special thanks to you for being on episode 1 of UnPack Pittsburgh. If you are a person, a place, or you know a product that has ties to the Pittsburgh area, please, we want to hear from you. Go to unpackpittsburgh.com and go to the featured section and drop us a line. So episode 2 is coming soon. Thank you all for listening.